Story 1. She had prayed for years to become a mother, lit candles, fasted through pain, smiled through miscarriages. And when the test finally turned positive, it should have been a miracle, but it brought sadness. Naomi didn't tell her husband, not because she didn't want the child, but because she knew it wasn't his, and when she wrote in her journal that night, alone in her bedroom, she didn't ask for strength, she asked for forgiveness, not knowing that Israel had already read her results, already seen the footage, already chosen judgment over mercy, and by the time she understood just how much he knew, it was already too late. We begin with a man named Israel Ward. Born in 1977 in Houston's 3rd Ward, Israel was the firstborn son of a Pentecostal deacon and a choir director. In that house, God wasn't a choice, he was a commandment. Israel's childhood was defined by long nights in wooden pews, days of fasting during school lunch, and sermons memorized like bedtime stories. There were no cartoons on Sundays, only scripture. There were no excuses for failure, only rebukes followed by prayer. His father believed discipline was love, even if it left marks that never quite healed. By 16, Israel was preaching from sidewalk corners with nothing but a milk crate and a cracked Bible. People listened, his voice carried, his words felt older than him, and with time, he wasn't just a preacher, he became a presence. By 22, he'd opened a storefront church on Alameda Road with 10 chairs and 1 microphone. That church would grow faster than even he imagined. They called it Dominion Fire Ministries, and within 2 decades, it would become one of the most recognizable houses of worship in southern Texas. Packed pews, national broadcasts, a full-time media team, and a sprawling campus with polished marble floors and imported stained glass. Israel had built an empire, and at the center stood a man who preached about restraint while living a life far removed from his beginnings. He now lived in a gated home in Pearl N, valued at $2.7 million, far from the rough corners of the 3rd Ward. But every Sunday, in custom-made suits and $1,000 shoes, Israel reminded his flock that blessings were proof of obedience. That wealth was God's reward for spiritual discipline. Standing beside him, always composed and never questioned, was Naomi Ward. Naomi was more than a pastor's wife. She was the church's heart, gentle, poised, and unshakably faithful. The daughter of a Mississippi preacher, she'd grown up in similar pews. She once had a recording deal as a gospel singer, but gave it up after marrying Israel at 23. To the congregation, she was grace in motion, a voice for the women, a counselor to broken marriages, a mother to the motherless. But what many didn't know, what she never said, was that Naomi had suffered 5 miscarriages. Quietly, alone. Each time she returned to church the following Sunday with a pressed dress and a painted smile, she bore her grief like it was. The congregation often asked why the first family had no children. Naomi would only say, and then there was Jonas Ward, Israel's younger brother by 7 years. Where Israel was focused and calculated, Jonas was chaos. He'd spent most of his adult life drifting through halfway houses, jail cells, and rehab clinics. Drugs, theft, more drugs, in and out. For years, the brothers didn't speak. But after a near-fatal overdose in 2019, Jonas turned up at Dominion Fire Ministries, ragged, shaking, and asking for one more chance. Israel gave him one. Jonas cleaned up and moved into a church-owned studio apartment behind the sanctuary. He joined the worship band as a guitarist, and for a time he played like a trying to atone. But recovery isn't linear, and while Jonas found temporary peace on stage, the past never stayed buried. He struggled with staying clean. There were whispers, missed meetings, long absences, and nights when the church office lights stayed on well past midnight. Still, Israel kept him close. Some say too close. From the outside, the Wards appeared anointed, chosen, the perfect example of faith overcoming hardship. But the distance between perception and reality is often measured in silence. And in this case, silence ran deep. Dominion Fire Ministries wasn't just a church. It was a brand. It had a logo, a slogan, a merch line. The congregation grew from 10 to over 5,000 members, many of whom credited the church with changing, or saving, their lives. People testified to healings, financial breakthroughs, and relationships restored. Sunday services were standing room only. Prayer lines stretched outside. Israel's sermons streamed in homes across the country. One woman, an elderly mother of 3, once said, "I never believed a man could speak straight from heaven until I heard Pastor Ward." Another cried as she recalled him baptizing her autistic son. "He made us feel like we mattered to God." But beneath the cameras, lights, and songs, there were rooms no one entered without invitation. There were meetings not listed in bulletins. There were stories that never reached the pulpit. Former staff members would later speak of private counseling sessions where young women were asked to lay hands. Not in prayer, but in submission. There were closed-door rituals labeled spiritual purification where touch blurred lines with therapy. Multiple women, in separate interviews, described similar settings: dim lights, oil, verses quoted out of context. Then there were the late-night prayer meetings, invite only, always ending past midnight. Volunteers said they were discouraged from asking questions. Cameras were turned off, and afterward, Israel was often unreachable for days. But during the day, everything looked fine, orderly, blessed. No one questioned the man who wore the collar, healed the sick, and held the keys to the kingdom. He preached sanctity, but some say his gospel was power, wrapped in scripture, reinforced by fear, and left unquestioned by loyalty. And through it all, Naomi stood silently beside him, never contradicting, never correcting, smiling when expected, crying only in private. But what Naomi didn't know, what she wouldn't discover until much later, was that her husband was living another life. Buried behind email aliases and hidden folders was a network of accounts on platforms like Tinder, Craigslist, niche websites advertising what he called therapeutic restoration, messages between him and strangers, some seeking prayer, others seeking something far from it. Israel used words like deliverance and surrender, asking for submission in both body and spirit. While Naomi taught Bible study for wives, Israel sat in hotel rooms with women who knew him only as Pastor I. Some of them were followers. Some were sex workers. Some were both. At church, couples came to him for marriage counseling. He would look the husband in the eye and say, "Lead with love." Then turn to the wife and say, "Submit more. Pray harder. Give him what he needs. Your body is not your own. It is his and it is the Lord's." To Naomi, the line between faith and manipulation had always been clear, but that clarity was beginning to fade. While her marriage eroded under the weight of lies, another presence in her life began to grow louder. Jonas, Israel's younger brother. Naomi and Jonas began spending more time together during late-night rehearsals. It started with small talk, conversations about music, about their childhoods, about how lonely ministry could feel. One night, while tuning his guitar, Jonas told Naomi something she hadn't known. Their father used to beat him after Israel left the room. He said Israel never saw it because he never stayed long enough to notice. He was always Daddy's favorite, Jonas told her, the string still humming under his fingers. Now he thinks he's God's favorite too. They both laugh it away. Whether Israel saw the growing closeness or sensed it, no one knows for sure. But one evening, Israel invited Naomi into what he described as a sacred exercise. A practice, he said, to realign their marriage. Something God had shown him in prayer. It wasn't a ritual, it wasn't a contract. Just a night. A single night of shared spiritual intimacy with Jonas. Naomi was stunned. At first she thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. He sat her down, opened his Bible, and pointed to verses about submission, about sacrifice, about Abraham's obedience. He spoke with calm authority, as though it had already been decided. Naomi pushed back. She cried, but she was tired. Tired of feeling unwanted. Tired of carrying the weight of a broken marriage alone. She agreed. One night, just once. February 19th, 2022. The air inside the Ward home was unusually still. Naomi had prepared herself all day, but nothing about it felt real. The bedroom had been altered. The lights were dimmed. Candles lit every surface. The soft sound of psalms played from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner. There was oil on the nightstand. A Bible opened to the Book of Song of Solomon. The room smelled of cedarwood and lavender. Israel stood by the door. He didn't touch her. He didn't offer comfort. He simply reminded her of the agreement. One night, one act, one purpose. He kissed her forehead, turned, and left the room. Moments later, the door opened again. It was Jonas. He entered slowly, unsure of where to stand. Naomi was already seated on the bed. She looked down. He looked away. The music continued. Neither spoke. Time passed, though neither could later say how much. It was like the night existed outside of the clock. Eventually, he sat beside her. She flinched. He whispered her name. And that was the beginning. Whatever happened after that was not recorded. Not described. But we know this. At some point, the distance between them collapsed. Naomi allowed herself to be seen, not as a pastor's wife, but as a woman whose body had become a battlefield. Between faith and longing, loneliness, and the need to feel wanted. When it was over, she cried. Jonas held her. They didn't speak, but something had changed, not just in their relationship, but in each of them individually. A boundary had been crossed that couldn't be rebuilt with silence or scripture. In the days that followed, Naomi returned to her duties. Bible study, choir meetings, Sunday front row. But Jonas kept showing up at her door after dark. At first, he made excuses, broken strings on his guitar, questions about the worship set. But the visits became longer, then physical, then frequent. He told her he loved her. She didn't say it back, but she didn't stop him either. Naomi began skipping counseling sessions. She stopped eating dinner with Israel. Her texts went unanswered. She smiled less, sang less, and prayed only when asked to in public. Privately, she journaled more. Her entries changed from devotionals to confessions. There was guilt, yes, but there was also a kind of freedom she hadn't felt in over a decade. Meanwhile, Jonas was slipping again. Members of the worship team noticed missed rehearsals, bloodshot eyes, nervous pacing. Then the marks started showing. Bruises on his arms, sweat-soaked shirts in air-conditioned rooms. He denied it when asked, but behind closed doors the relapse was in full motion. Heroin, fentanyl, sex work. He moved in and out of the shadows with practiced ease, as if he never fully left them. One night, Naomi noticed a sore on his lip. Another night, a needle wrapper in his jacket. She asked if he was using it again. He said no, but she already knew. 3 months later, during a routine blood panel for yet another IVF consultation, Naomi's doctor called her back in. He had good and bad news. The good news was that she was pregnant. She wanted to jump and dance for joy, but there was bad news that made her scared. The doctor continued, "The bad news is that you have tested positive for HIV." She drove home in silence, the radio off, her hands on the wheel trembling. When she reached her driveway, she didn't get out of the car for almost an hour. Her phone rang 7 times. She didn't answer. "God, please forgive me. I think I'm dying. I think I killed my marriage. I think I killed something in myself. I'll never get back." 3 days passed, then 4. Naomi avoided Jonas, avoided Israel, avoided church. But while she was grieving her own mistake, Israel was watching. Months earlier, he had installed a hidden camera inside their bedroom closet. It was disguised as a smoke detector. He said it was for security, for peace of mind. But what it gave him was access and confirmation. He didn't confront her right away. Instead, he went quiet. He stopped preaching. He stopped attending staff meetings. He canceled his Thursday prayer call, which he hadn't missed in 14 years. He locked himself inside his private prayer chamber, a soundproof room built into the back of his office, lined with handwritten prayers and a single, red leather Bible on the altar. For 6 straight days, no one saw him. Meals were left at the door. Lights flickered late into the night. He spent that time listening to the recordings, reading her journal, reviewing audio files from confessional booths, secretly recorded over months without consent. One of them captured Jonas whispering Naomi's name during prayer. That was the moment everything inside him shifted. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. But something left him that week. Something fundamental. When he finally emerged, he wasn't the same man. Not to his staff. Not to his church. and certainly not to his family. What followed would become one of the most devastating acts of violence in Houston's religious history. He left the prayer room before sunrise, shaved, put on a clean white shirt, and drove out of Pearl and without telling anyone where he was going. The first hotel was a La Quinta off the freeway, not far from the airport, the kind of place where no one looks twice and the staffer forgets your face before you've even walked out the door. He didn't say his name, didn't use a credit card, just handed over cash and asked for a room on that night. He opened his phone, scrolled through old messages, and began replying to women he had once ministered to in private. Some were former choir members, some from out-of-town retreats. Others were women he had delivered sermons to about purity, about waiting, about giving their body only to God. Now he was calling them at 2 a.m., asking if they could come pray, asking if they could help him through what he called a spiritual crisis. They came one by one. He went on a sex spree. To him this was vengeance. At first he spoke softly, kept his Bible on the dresser, left the television on with the volume low. But that didn't last. The second night he didn't speak at all. He opened the door in silence, stepped back, and let her in. She asked what he needed. He unbuttoned his shirt. She understood. The next day he called another, then another, then another. He kept track not with names but with perfumes, lipstick colors, the way their voices changed when they moaned. But he felt nothing. He wasn't aroused. He wasn't angry. He was searching, and every time he finished, he stared at the ceiling with the someone who thought he'd find answers inside someone else's body. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't eating. He was drinking from the hotel ice bucket, pacing the floor, praying out loud between sessions, and when the sun rose, he'd read the Psalms backward as if doing it in reverse would take him back to the day before Naomi ever touched Jonas. On the fifth night, one of the women left in tears. She told him he looked like he was dying. He didn't say anything, just closed the door and stood there for a full hour, still naked, still sweating, still asking himself what it meant that he'd already forgotten her name. Back at the church, he was still posting Bible verses online, still sending out daily devotionals through the church app. The congregation believed he was deep in study, preparing for a new prophetic series. They didn't know that while they were reading his thoughts on obedience, he was in the church treasurer's niece. He felt no remorse, only emptiness. It wasn't revenge. It was rehearsal. He was rehearsing what it meant to be numb. He told himself that if he could sleep with enough women, maybe he'd forget the sound Naomi made when Jonas kissed her neck, or the way Jonas whispered her name like it belonged to him more than it ever did to Israel. But it didn't work. Each time he pulled someone closer, Naomi's face came clearer, and Jonas' voice got louder, and the child growing inside her stomach felt less like a tragedy, and more like a curse. The final journal entry from that stretch of days didn't mention names. It didn't mention bodies. It was written in shaky handwriting and smeared with something brown. Maybe coffee, maybe blood from his own nose, maybe oil from the last night's laying on of hands. It read, "He laid with her like he was born to do it. She received him like I never existed, and now she carries what should have been mine. They called it union. I call it theft." That night, he stopped calling women. He deleted the apps. He returned home, walked into the bathroom, and stared at himself in the mirror for nearly 40 minutes. Then he opened the closet, reached for the box labeled deliverance tools, and began to plan. It wasn't marked urgent. It wasn't even addressed directly to him. It came through the church email server, like dozens of reports did every week. Medical clearances, marriage license requests, baptism forms. It was Naomi's most recent health screening, submitted automatically through the insurance portal tied to their IVF consultations. He wouldn't have opened it if not for her name catching his eye. A familiar file. Nothing unusual. He clicked. He read. Then he stopped breathing. There, on the fifth line under blood work results in plain black text, was a word he never expected to see beside her name. HIV positive. He stared at it, closed the file, reopened it, logged out, logged back in. Still there. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't move. For the first few minutes he just sat at his desk, the room quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioning. His hand clenched around the mouse. His jaw tightened. A A sharp pain formed behind his eyes. And then the questions started. How long had she known? Did she find out before or after sleeping with his brother? By afternoon, he was at the clinic. He walked in through the side entrance, hoodie pulled low, sunglasses still on, hands in his pockets like a man with something to hide from the world, or maybe from himself. He didn't speak to the receptionist, just handed over his ID, whispered the reason for the visit, and signed the waiver form without reading it. They took blood. They asked questions. He said little. They asked if he had reason to believe he'd been exposed. He nodded once, said it was personal, said he just needed peace of mind. The nurse placed a hand on his shoulder, told him it would be okay. He didn't flinch, but he didn't look her in the eye either. He waited in the car for 2 hours, didn't go get food, didn't check his phone, just sat there, engine running, staring at the steering wheel like it might tell him what kind of man he was now. The thought that he could test positive wasn't just about his health. It was about humiliation. It was about standing in front of his congregation next Sunday and wondering which woman in the crowd would see right through him. It was about knowing that the woman who wore white beside him every Sunday had taken a risk that could have written the end of his life in silence. When the clinic finally called his name, he walked back in with a calm he had to fake. The nurse handed him the results in an envelope. He opened it slowly, eyes moving line by line. Negative. It was a moment of relief, but it wasn't enough to settle anything inside him. He was pleased, and he was displeased, because if the result had been positive, it would have given him something clear to blame. A wound with shape. But now all he had was proof that she had brought death into his home, and that it hadn't touched him. Not yet, but it had come close. Too close. That night, he didn't speak during dinner. Naomi set the table, prayed over the meal, and talked about an upcoming women's retreat like nothing was wrong. Like her hands weren't stained with a truth he had already read in her blood. He stared at her the whole time, not in anger, not even in confusion, but in stillness. When they finished eating, he didn't wash his plate. He walked to the living room, turned off the TV, and stood in front of her. "Tell me," he said. She froze. "Tell me who gave it to you." She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't lie. Maybe she had been waiting for this moment. Or maybe she was just too tired to hide anymore. Her voice cracked as soon as it left her lips. "It was Jonas," she said. The air left the room. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just looked at him with the face of a woman who'd stopped pretending long before this conversation began. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. "It wasn't a plan. It just happened. He was there when you weren't. He listened when you didn't. And I thought you wouldn't care. I thought maybe you already knew. Maybe you didn't want me anymore." He didn't move. "And yes," she added, her voice shaking now, "I'm positive. I didn't know until after. I didn't know he had it. I swear to God, Israel. I didn't know." He stepped back. Not fast. Not dramatically. Just one slow step, like the floor itself had shifted. "How long?" he asked. She whispered. "Weeks. Maybe more. You were going to carry his child," he said, "and preach purity." She looked down. He walked past her, into his room, closed the door, and locked it. What came next wasn't prayer. It was preparation. Days passed. The church kept wait. Naomi hadn't returned home. Jonas hadn't been seen since rehearsal. Israel stopped answering calls. He canceled staff meetings. His voice was no longer heard on morning devotionals, and no one had seen him walk into the sanctuary. At first, it was dismissed as rest, spiritual retreat, time away, a season of prayer. That's what the inner circle told those who asked. July 10th, 2022. Something changed. Custodian working late heard what sounded like dripping. A slow, steady tap echoing from behind the walls of the old parsonage attached to the church's original structure. A place that had been long closed to everyone but Israel himself. It was his private chamber. No staff entered without permission. Some said it was where he went to fast, to war in the spirit, to hear from God without distraction. Others said it was just where he went to disappear. But this time he hadn't come out. A locksmith was called under quiet orders from a deacon, And when they opened it, what they saw could never be unseen. Naomi and Jonas Ward lay lifeless, strung up on large, inverted wooden crosses, bolted to the floor and ceiling like they had been carved into the architecture itself. Their arms were stretched wide, wrists bound tightly with rosaries, each bead stained red, their mouths stuffed full with torn scripture pages, later identified as verses from Proverbs 7, a passage that warns of seduction, adultery, and betrayal. But that wasn't the worst of it. Naomi's body, pale and expressionless, had been cut open from just below the sternum to her pelvis. Her womb emptied. The incision was clean, clinical. No hesitation marks. Whoever had done it knew exactly what they were doing, or had rehearsed it in their mind again and again. Directly in front of her body, on a marble-topped altar in the center of the room, sat a golden chalice. Inside, wrapped in linen and soaked in a pool of crimson, was the unborn child. The chalice rested on top of an open Bible, turned to a page in Leviticus where a verse was underlined over and in red ink. The life of the flesh is in the blood. Pastor Israel Ward didn't run, he didn't hide, he didn't change his clothes or cover his tracks or drive out of town under a different name. He stayed exactly where he had always been, in the house they bought 10 years ago with tithe money in favor, the one with the white pillars. Outside, the street was quiet, neighbors going about their morning routines, no one knowing that the man inside the cream-colored brick home had just sacrificed 2 lives to a belief that only made sense inside his own mind. When the knock came, he didn't flinch, he didn't move right away. He waited until the second knock, louder this time, and then stood up slowly, walked down the hallway, unlocked the door, and opened it without a word. The officers on the porch didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. He stepped out without resistance, hands already visible, eyes empty but calm, and they placed him in handcuffs as gently as possible given the weight of what he'd done. And he didn't ask why. He didn't ask what was happening. He didn't say a single word because he already knew. The trial began nearly 4 months later. By then, the story had spread across the country. The footage from the arrest, the photos from the crime scene, the list of women Israel had contacted, the journal excerpts, all of it had turned what was once a private betrayal into a national spectacle. Courtrooms filled early. Reporters set up across the street before sunrise. Lines formed around the block. Some came for justice. Some came for answers. Some came out of morbid curiosity, unable to reconcile the man on the screen with the monster described in the charges. The prosecution didn't waste time. They started with the surveillance footage, retrieved from the hidden camera system Israel had installed throughout the church, footage that showed Jonas entering the parsonage basement on the night he was killed and never coming back out. There was no struggle, no alarm, just a timestamp, a door that opened and then didn't open again. Then came the financial records, transactions for surgical supplies, the purchase of the chalice, and shipments of heavy wooden beams delivered under a fake church renovation project. There was nothing haphazard about what had happened. It had been planned, prepared, premeditated. When the judge asked if the defendant had anything to say before sentencing, there was a long silence, a kind of stillness that felt like waiting for something to fall. And finally, slowly, Israel stood from his chair, turned his head slightly toward the crowd, and with no expression and no hesitation, he spoke just one sentence, his voice low but steady, and he said, "God wrestled with Jacob and renamed him Israel. I wrestled with flesh and named it God." And then he sat back down, folded his hands again, and never spoke another word. When the judge delivered the sentence, the courtroom was completely still. No one moved, no one whispered, and Israel Ward sat as he had the entire time, with his hands clasped and his gaze unshaken, as the words were spoken plainly and without ceremony, that he was to serve life in prison without the possibility of parole, that he would die behind bars, that he would never again stand behind a pulpit or hold a microphone, or walk through the doors of Dominion Fire Ministries. And even then he didn't flinch, didn't lower his head, didn't reach for a Bible or a final prayer. He simply blinked once, and breathed, and looked forward like he had been waiting for that sentence longer than anyone else in the room. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. The news headlines moved quickly. The story had already become national, and now with the verdict sealed and the sentence final, the reactions poured in. Some mourned, some shouted justice, others stood in disbelief, unable to reconcile the man who baptized their children with the man now locked in a concrete cell. But in the neighborhoods where he once preached, and the homes where his voice used to echo through YouTube devotionals and Sunday morning broadcasts, a strange silence followed. Like a void had opened and no one could quite say what had been lost, because what was taken had never truly belonged to them to begin with. In the weeks that followed, Dominion Fire Ministries was officially shut down. The building was locked, its signage removed, the congregation scattered. Some moved to new churches, some stopped attending altogether, and the sanctuary that once held thousands now sat in dust and quiet, while the parsonage was sealed indefinitely, with no plans for renovation, no plans for redemption, just absence and memory, and the knowledge of what had happened there. In the end, what is faith without truth? What is power without accountability? What becomes of a house of God when secrets become sacred and love becomes a lie? When theology becomes a tool and leadership becomes a shield? When doctrine is twisted to justify desire and scripture is used to erase guilt? Who is left to clean up what the preacher buried? And who dares to speak when the pulpit goes quiet? The truth is, no one leaves untouched. Not the innocent, not the loyal, not even the ones who thought they were above it all. Was Israel mad? Or was he convinced of a higher calling? Could this tragedy have been prevented? And in churches today, across cities and small towns, across live streams and stages, behind megachurch walls and storefront ministries, in the silence of offices and green rooms and counseling sessions, who watches the shepherd? If the story moved you, challenged you, or opened your eyes, subscribe, like, and comment for more true crime documentaries that go deeper than headlines, and share this video if you believe stories like this one need to be told, because silence protects no one. Story 2. January 16, 2019. A peaceful Colorado afternoon shattered by a violent hit and run. Paula Williams, a woman with a future full of dreams, stepped out for a walk and was a victim of a hit and run. Her husband, Kendrick Williams, appeared on the news in a state of desperation, his voice cracking as he begged for information. But as the investigation dug deeper, the truth began to unravel. The man who seemed so heartbroken, the man who publicly mourned the loss of his wife, was hiding a dark and chilling secret. Then, just when everyone had almost lost hope, a black Lamborghini appeared. Not just any Lamborghini, a brand new one, paid in full. And sitting behind the wheel, someone who should have been mourning, someone who had no business driving that car. What really happened to Paula Williams? How long had the people she trusted been hiding the truth? The answers were buried in plain sight, and the deeper they dug, the darker it became. Paula Williams was the kind of woman whose presence commanded both respect and warmth. At 40, she was a mid-level accounting professional, working hard to build a life not just for herself, but for those she loved most. Ambitious but grounded, she balanced a demanding job with the role of a devoted wife and sister, always nurturing those close to her with care and loyalty. Kendrick Williams, her husband, saw her as the heart of their family, a partner whose determination was matched only by the quiet strength she carried every day. Their marriage was rooted in shared dreams. Paula and Kendrick had a vision for the future, one that centered on building a home together, a place where their life's work and love could flourish. Every paycheck Paula earned was carefully saved, a commitment to securing that future. Their joint bank account became a symbol of trust, a testament to the life they planned to create side by side. Growing up with her younger sister, Maurice Blake, Paula shared more than a home. She shared a bond that shaped both their lives. Childhood memories reveal moments filled with laughter, sibling support, and the kind of loyalty that can only come from growing up side by side. Paula was the protective sister, guiding Maurice through the uncertainties of youth, offering stability in a world that was constantly changing. Maurice's life, however, would follow a different path. She was younger, stylish, and carried an air of confidence that set her apart. Her ambitions led her toward a lifestyle marked by luxury and excitement, a stark contrast to Paula's steady, careful approach to life. When Maurice arrived in Colorado, staying under Paula and Kendrick's roof, her presence introduced new energy, sometimes challenging, sometimes alluring. that would alter the delicate balance of their family life. Kendrick Williams came from humble beginnings, a man forged by the values of hard work and perseverance. Raised in Colorado, he spent his days at an auto repair shop, his hands steady as he worked to provide for the family he loved. His devotion to Paula was deep, but beneath his quiet demeanor lay insecurities born from the shadow Paula's growing career cast over his own ambitions. He wanted to be a provider, a partner on equal footing, but often wrestled with feelings of inadequacy and frustration. As Maurice became more involved in their lives, her relationship with Kendrick grew beyond simple family ties. What started as casual interactions shifted into something far more complicated. Maurice's charm and youthful confidence drew Kendrick's attention in ways that would soon change everything. Their growing closeness introduced tension into a household that once seemed unshakable. Unlike Paula, who focused on the long game, saving, planning, and building, a different energy pulsed between Maurice and Kendrick. It was a connection marked by moments of shared ambition and whispered conversations away from prying eyes. What the family did not see was how quickly lines were crossed and how trust began to erode from within. Paula's plans for the future were clear and hopeful. She and Kendrick dreamed of purchasing a new home, a place where they could build memories and lay down roots. Every dollar saved in their joint account was a step toward that dream, a symbol of the life they intended to create together. But beneath the surface, the foundations of that dream were beginning to crack. The very people Paula trusted most were moving in directions she could never have anticipated. The quiet Colorado neighborhood that once held the promise of safety and comfort was about to become the backdrop for a story of betrayal, where love, ambition, and desire would collide with devastating consequences. What seemed like a future full of hope was quietly unraveling, piece by piece, in ways that would shock everyone who thought they knew Paula, Kendrick, and Maurice. January 16, 2019, a day that began like any other in the quiet Colorado neighborhood. Paula Williams stepped outside with Bernice, her loyal dog, for what was meant to be a simple, peaceful walk. The late afternoon air was crisp but calm, the sun dipping low and casting long shadows across the streets she knew so well. Birds chirped softly, and the faint rustle of leaves stirred in the gentle breeze. Paula's mood was light. A small smile crossed her face as Bernice tugged playfully on the leash, eager to explore. But those familiar streets would soon become the setting of a terrible event. As Paula walked, a vehicle appeared. A car moving faster than expected, its presence sudden and jarring. Neighbors would later recall the moment when that car seemed to aim directly at Paula, as if with purpose. The impact was brutal. Paula was struck, her body thrown forward, her head hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. Blood began to pool beneath her, a stark contrast to the peaceful street she once walked. Bernice, caught in the collision, was injured as well. The dog limped around the spot where Paula fell, crying out in pain and confusion, fighting for his life. Passers-by rushed to help, but Paula's condition was grave, and the driver, responsible for the crash, did not stop. Instead, the car sped away, disappearing into the fading light. Emergency responders arrived quickly after a frantic call from a witness. Police launched a search that same evening, canvassing the area and interviewing anyone who might have seen something. But despite their efforts, Paula was gone. No trace, no sign beyond that stretch of street where she had fallen. Bernice was taken to a local animal hospital, but Paula herself vanished into silence. As the hours turned to days, the community's worry grew. Neighbors shared their memories in hushed tones, their stories painting a picture of shock and disbelief. They recalled the sounds of sirens, the frantic search teams, and the chilling sight of Paula's abandoned belongings left behind. Kendrick Williams was devastated. The man who had shared his life, his dreams, and every ordinary day with Paula now faced a reality he couldn't comprehend. His world had been shattered in an instant, and every question that filled his mind weighed heavy on his heart. Who could have been responsible for the woman he loved? How could something so tragic have unfolded right under their noses, on a street so familiar? In interviews, Kendrick's voice trembled with sorrow, his eyes searching for answers that seemed to slip further away with each passing day. He spoke of Paula's kindness, her ambition, the life they planned to build together. And yet, beneath his grief, there was a flicker of confusion, of disbelief that someone could have done this to her. Friends and family rallied around him, offering support, but the pain was raw, and the silence that followed Paula's disappearance only deepened the wound. Kendrick's world was collapsing, and with it came a relentless need to understand what had happened, what force had torn their lives apart. But as days turned into weeks, some began to wonder if Kendrick himself held answers he was unwilling to share. As the investigation pressed on, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Investigators reached out repeatedly to Kendrick Williams, hoping to gather information, to piece together the moments before Paula's disappearance. But each call went unanswered. Texts and messages were ignored. When officers finally made contact, Kendrick was evasive, offering little more than vague responses and deflecting questions with an uncomfortable silence. This avoidance did not go unnoticed. The police grew concerned, sensing a wall rising between them and the man who was supposed to be their key witness, and the person most deeply affected by the tragedy. Their instincts told them that behind Kendrick's quiet grief, there might be truths waiting to be uncovered. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was awash with whispers. Residents, once united in their sorrow, found themselves divided by suspicion. Conversations in grocery stores and quiet porch talks began to shift. Questions filled the air. Why was Kendrick so distant? Why had he suddenly stopped attending community vigils? What was he hiding? The very man who had been heartbroken in public was now retreating from those who sought answers. Speculation grew like a slow-burning ember, fueled by silence and unanswered questions. People began to wonder if the tragedy was more than just a cruel accident, if the story they'd been told was incomplete. And as the community grappled with uncertainty, investigators dug deeper, peeling back layers that had been carefully concealed. Exactly 1 month after Paula Williams vanished, the quiet neighborhood that had been holding its breath was stunned by an unexpected arrival. A sleek black Lamborghini, polished and gleaming under the midday sun, rolled slowly down the familiar streets. The kind of car that doesn't belong in this modest community, a stark contrast to the everyday lives of its residents. Behind the wheel was Maurice Blake, Paula's younger sister. Her presence in that luxury vehicle immediately raised eyebrows, but the shock didn't end there. Riding beside her was Kendrick Williams, Paula's husband and the man who had been the face of heartbreak just weeks before. The car, it was soon revealed, had been purchased using funds withdrawn from the joint bank account Paula and Kendrick had shared, the same account where Paula had saved every paycheck with the hope of buying a home, a future. Now the money was gone, emptied without explanation, fueling confusion and suspicion among neighbors and investigators alike. The sight of Maurice and Kendrick together in that Lamborghini sent ripples through the community. Conversations stopped as the car passed by. Windows closed quickly and whispers filled the air. Questions about how such a sudden change of fortune had come to be. The police, working tirelessly to solve the mystery of Paula Williams' disappearance, were taken aback by the sudden arrival of the black Lamborghini. It wasn't just the flashy car itself. It was the story behind it that unsettled them. Funds from the very account Paula had helped build had vanished, and the man who was supposed to be grieving her loss was now seen riding alongside her sister in a vehicle that seemed out of place, out of reach. The neat narrative they'd been piecing together began to unravel, replaced by a growing suspicion that betrayal had come from within. The quiet neighborhood, once filled with sympathy and hope, now watched with wary eyes as the investigation took a sharp and unsettling turn. Weeks into the investigation, with no clear leads and the case growing colder, the detectives made a critical decision. They returned to the very place where Paula Williams vanished. The street, once quiet and familiar, was now a focal point of intense scrutiny. Officers scoured every inch, retracing steps, searching for anything that might have been missed in the chaos that followed the hit and run. They examined the cracked pavement where Paula had fallen, the curbsides, the surrounding bushes, and every nearby alleyway. The wind whispered through the empty streets as flashlights swept over forgotten corners and overlooked details. It was painstaking, slow work, but every moment counted. Then, their attention turned to a small security camera perched on the side of a building across the street. a camera that had been disregarded early on because of poor image quality and inconsistent angles. At first, the footage seemed no better than static, blurry, grainy, barely more than shadows moving in the dark. But now, with advanced image enhancement technology and the relentless focus of the team, the investigators began to notice something previously missed. A car entered the frame, moving swiftly, almost recklessly fast for the quiet neighborhood. Through the haze of pixels and flickering frames, the faint outline of a driver's face appeared. It was a ghost in the machine, blurred but unmistakably there. A man behind the wheel, his features barely visible, yet enough to spark recognition and hope. The car's speed, the driver's posture, the way the vehicle veered, it all painted a chilling picture of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. This breakthrough was a turning point. The investigators now held a vital clue, a direct connection to the person who had shattered Paula's life that day. The footage gave them a face to hunt, a lead to follow. The face captured on the grainy footage was carefully examined and cross-referenced. After days of tireless work, the man behind the wheel was finally identified, Harry Young. Harry Young wasn't a stranger to the community, but he wasn't someone anyone really trusted either. He had no formal criminal record, no charges or convictions to his name. Legally, he was a man without a blemish. Yet those who lived nearby spoke of him with unease, a figure who moved on the edges of the neighborhood's collective watchfulness. Quiet rumors followed him, whispers of petty disputes, questionable choices, and a temperament that made neighbors wary. He was known to keep to himself, but when he did interact, it was often with a sharp tongue or a cold glance. Once Harry Young's identity was confirmed, the police moved quickly to locate him. But Harry was nowhere to be found in the community. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, questioned friends and family, but every lead went cold. He had slipped away, leaving behind only questions and suspicion. The search expanded beyond the familiar streets, stretching toward the outskirts of town and beyond. Days turned into a tense manhunt. Then, finally, they caught up with him, far from home, in a small, rundown area outside the city limits. Harry was taken into custody and brought in for questioning. His sudden disappearance only deepened the mystery. What was he running from? What did he know? Meanwhile, as the police focused on Harry, Kendrick Williams and Maurice Blake remained under quiet but careful surveillance. Their lives had changed dramatically in the weeks following Paula's disappearance. They were spending money freely, on lavish dinners, luxury cars, and expensive outings that stood in stark contrast to the grief the community expected. The police watched silently, noting every extravagant purchase, every new connection, aware that beneath the surface, more secrets were waiting to be uncovered. At the police station, Harry Young sat in the interrogation room, his expression unreadable. When questioned, he refused to offer any meaningful answers. His words were defiant and confusing. He claimed he had been abducted by the police, insisting he hadn't run away at all. Instead, he said, he had merely returned home to the community to rest. His calm demeanor, however, began to crack the moment detectives placed the blurry CCTV footage before him, the very evidence that had led to his capture. For the first time, Harry's confident facade faltered. His eyes darted nervously as the reality of the situation settled in. He knew then that the thin cover he'd maintained was broken. But even faced with undeniable proof, Harry remained silent on the details. He offered no explanation for his actions on that day, or any involvement in Paula Williams' death. The interrogation had just begun, and beneath the surface of his silence, investigators sensed that the truth, long buried, was within reach. After hours of intense questioning, the walls around Harry Young began to crumble. Faced with mounting evidence, his silence broke, and he made a confession that sent shockwaves through the investigation. Harry revealed that Kendrick Williams had approached him weeks before Paula's disappearance. The proposal was chilling in its simplicity. Kendrick offered him $2,000 to carry out a single act, one that would set the tragic events into motion. According to Harry, the plan was cold and calculated. He was to deliberately hit Paula with a car, making it look like a random accident, and then flee the scene without being seen. Harry described how the money was meant to be payment for this one act, a hit-and-run staged to hide a deeper betrayal. This confession turned the investigation on its head. What had once seemed like a cruel, inexplicable tragedy was now clearly a premeditated crime. Kendrick's role was no longer one of grieving husband, but of orchestrator, and the quiet neighborhood was left to grapple with the devastating reality that the man they trusted most had played a part in the darkness that had fallen over their community. The moment had come. The police, armed with the full weight of their investigation, moved in to arrest Kendrick and Maurice. It was no longer a matter of speculation. It was a matter of undeniable evidence. The case had evolved from a simple missing persons inquiry into a complex conspiracy of murder, betrayal, and greed. Investigators had uncovered layers of deception that stretched back months before Paula's disappearance. Hidden messages between Kendrick and Maurice painted a clear picture of an affair that had been kept secret for years. What had begun in the shadows of their shared home, with Kendrick and Maurice's relationship blossoming out of the watchful eye of Paula, had turned into something far darker, an affair that was the very foundation of a plot to destroy Paula's life. Maurice, unlike Paula, was younger, more vibrant, and carried herself with a confidence that Kendrick found irresistible. She was drawn to the luxury of a lifestyle that had always eluded her, and her growing closeness to Kendrick was an open secret, though no one could have guessed just how deep their bond had gone. The affair had been ongoing for 2 years, hidden under the roof that Paula and Kendrick had shared, but it was not until Paula's tragic walk on January 16th that everything would come to a head. Kendrick had been aware that Paula's plans were set, that she was moving toward a new life for them, new dreams, new hopes, but instead of sharing those plans, Kendrick and Maurice had begun their own secret, far darker plot. They had waited for the right moment, carefully watching for Paula's vulnerability, and when the time came, Kendrick paid Harry to do it with chilling precision. He struck Paula with the car, leaving her in the middle of the street, abandoned and alone. The police had always suspected foul play, but it wasn't until weeks later that the real breakthrough came. An insurance claim had been filed months before Paula's disappearance, well before the investigation even began, on a $600,000 life insurance policy. At first glance, everything seemed legitimate, but as the detectives dug deeper, they discovered that the policy had been signed with forged initials, an unmistakable sign of manipulation and deceit. It wasn't a random act of fraud. It was part of a well-thought-out plan, meticulously crafted and executed with chilling precision. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Paula's tragic death was no accident. It was a calculated act, carefully planned by the people closest to her, the very people she trusted most. May 10, 2019. The weight of justice came crashing down. It was the day for the court proceedings. Harry, Kendrick, and Maurice were officially arrested and charged with premeditated murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. It was the culmination of a long, harrowing journey for Paula Williams' family, friends, and the community who had once trusted the couple. The news hit hard. The same man who had mourned the loss of his wife, the same woman who had shared that grief as Paula's sister, were now facing charges that painted a chilling portrait of betrayal and greed. The betrayal went far beyond a simple affair. It was a planned execution of trust, a deliberate act fueled by a thirst for money and a desire to build a life with no regard for the cost. The legal battle was now at the forefront, and the eyes of the community, once filled with sympathy for Kendrick, turned to disbelief and anger. What had started as a heartfelt tragedy, with a grieving husband and sister-in-law desperate for answers, now lay bare in front of the courts. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the prosecution presented its case. Every piece of evidence, every secret conversation between Kendrick and Maurice came to light. Messages, financial records, and the damning life insurance policy all painted a portrait of a carefully orchestrated murder. The motive was clear: $600,000, a sum that could provide a new life, a life of luxury, of freedom, one that was supposed to come at the cost of Paula's life. The defense tried to argue the improbability of the plot, that Kendrick was just a victim of a tragic accident, that he had acted out of grief and desperation. But it was hard to ignore the cold, hard facts. the forged initials on the life insurance policy, the secret meetings between Kendrick and Maurice, the fact that they had planned, watched and waited for the right moment to act. Morris's defense argued that she had never intended for Paula to die. They claimed that her affair with Kendrick, while wrong, had been born out of emotional isolation and a desire for affection, which she had not received from Paula. The defense attempted to depict Maurice as a woman who had suffered in the shadows, forced to live under Paula's roof, always overshadowed by her older sister's success and control. The strategy was clear. They sought to humanize Maurice. The defense tried to emphasize that Maurice had not been a mastermind behind the murder plot, but rather a woman caught up in an affair that grew out of frustration and emotional neglect. They suggested that Kendrick, feeling abandoned and pressured by his own failures, had manipulated Maurice into going along with his plan to kill Paula. According to them, Maurice had been pushed into a corner, and the murder had unfolded with little to no forethought on her part. They also made attempts to downplay Morris's role in the conspiracy, suggesting that while Maurice may have been complicit, she was not the one who orchestrated the events leading up to Paula's death. They argued that Kendrick had been the primary instigator, manipulating her emotions and using their shared desires for a better life as a way to coerce her into supporting the murder plan. Throughout the trial, the jury listened in stunned silence as the details of the affair were laid bare. The relationship between Kendrick and Maurice was more than just an illicit affair. It had been the foundation of a far-reaching plan that involved cold calculation. Maurice, young and ambitious, had been the driving force behind much of the deception. Her desire for a life she felt entitled to, a life far beyond what Paula could ever provide, had pushed her to convince Kendrick to take such extreme measures. Harry's defense attorneys argued that he was not a willing participant in the murder plot, but rather a man who had been cornered and coerced by Kendrick. They painted Harry as someone vulnerable, easily manipulated by Kendrick's promise of money. According to the defense, Harry had no personal connection to Paula. He wasn't driven by any hatred or malice. Instead, they portrayed him as a man who had simply been persuaded by Kendrick's persuasive rhetoric and promises of financial compensation for carrying out a single, seemingly simple act. The defense also attempted to argue that Harry's involvement had been minimal, that his role in the crime had been purely transactional. They insisted that he had simply driven the car in a moment of poor judgment, under pressure from Kendrick, who had convinced him that it was a simple task, one that would result in a large payday. Harry, they suggested, had been told the victim was simply someone who needed to be removed for financial reasons. But without the full understanding of the depth of the conspiracy he was becoming involved in, he had been told that the plan would be easy, that the hit would be a quick, clean act, and that he would walk away without anyone ever knowing his involvement. To support this argument, Harry's defense pointed to his lack of a criminal record. He had no prior history of violent crime, no known association with criminal enterprises, and had never been involved in anything like this before. The defense argued that Harry's clean background was evidence that he was not inherently violent or malicious, and that he had been swept up into the plot through manipulation and desperation. The defense also attempted to emphasize Harry's remorse. They painted him as a man who had been horrified by the crime, as soon as he realized the true extent of what Kendrick and Maurice had planned. Harry, they claimed, regretted his involvement in the murder, and had hoped to avoid any responsibility for what had happened. They even suggested that Harry's flight from the scene and subsequent disappearance were signs of his deep internal struggle, a man running from the guilt of his actions, not from the law. His actions, they claimed, had been those of a man who was ultimately overwhelmed by the gravity of what he had done. As the trial drew to a close, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. Kendrick and Maurice sat side by side, their faces a mixture of resignation and defiance, waiting for the verdict that would change their lives forever. There was no escaping the truth now. Their betrayal was too evident, too calculated to deny. The question still lingered in the minds of everyone watching. How long had this been in the works? How many sleepless nights had they spent plotting this twisted scheme? The community had trusted them, believed in their grief, and now that trust had been shattered. The devastation of Paula's death extended far beyond the loss of her life. It reached deep into the very foundation of the lives they had built together, exposing the deep rot at the heart of it all. As the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, the courtroom held its breath. The story of love, betrayal, and murder was nearing its final chapter, but the damage was already done. The memory of Paula Williams, her dreams, her hopes for the future, and the life she could have had, would linger long after the trial was over. The emotional scars left on the community would never fully heal. The judge pronounced their verdicts. Kendrick Williams was found guilty of premeditated murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. Maurice Blake, too, was convicted of premeditated murder, conspiracy, and insurance fraud, her role in the plan just as vital and deliberate as Kendrick's. And Harry Young, though seen by some as a mere accomplice, was also convicted of murder and conspiracy for his actions in carrying out the hit and run. All three were sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was filled with the sound of the gavel falling, marking the end of a long chapter of deception and tragedy. The victims in this case were not just Paula, but also the shattered trust of a community that had once supported Kendrick and Maurice. For the family of Paula Williams, while the sentence provided a sense of closure, it did little to ease the deep pain left by her loss. No sentence could bring her back or undo the damage caused by the actions of those she had loved and trusted most. The emotional scars left behind would last long after the prison doors closed behind Kendrick, Maurice, and Harry. The community, too, struggled to reconcile the two faces of Kendrick and Maurice. The couple they had seen so many times, offering support, sharing meals, and appearing as pillars of the neighborhood, were now forever branded by the horrifying truth that they had betrayed the very trust of those around them. The questions that lingered, how long had they been planning this, what could have driven them to such a drastic decision, would echo in the minds of those who had known them, leaving a shadow that would not soon dissipate. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, life in the neighborhood slowly began to rebuild, though the impact of Paula's death and the revelations of betrayal and greed would forever remain a part of their story. And as the years passed, people would remember Paula Williams, not just as the victim of a brutal crime, but as a woman who had been taken too soon, her future stolen by those she had trusted most. In the end, the case of Paula Williams serves as a painful reminder of the destructive power of betrayal. A story that began with trust and love was ultimately defined by deception, greed, and calculated cruelty. Kendrick and Maurice's plot not only destroyed a life, but shattered the lives of all who knew them. The ripples of their actions would be felt far beyond the courtroom, in the hearts of family, friends, and an entire community left to pick up the pieces of a broken trust. For Paula, her dream of a home, of a future with the man she loved, was stolen in an instant. The life she envisioned was replaced by tragedy, and the dream of a shared life with Kendrick was irrevocably crushed. Her legacy, though forever marred by betrayal, lives on in the memories of those who loved her. As Kendrick, Maurice, and Harry face the consequences of their actions, the question remains, what drives a person to betray those closest to them? How long can a web of lies, greed, and manipulation be hidden before the truth comes crashing down? For Paula's family and those who knew her, the answer will forever haunt them. This story serves as a reminder of the fragile nature of trust and the devastating consequences when it is broken. If you've been touched by the story of Paula Williams, or if you've experienced betrayal in your own life, remember that the truth always finds a way to the surface. Join the conversation. Share your thoughts on how trust can be restored, and what we can all do to protect ourselves and our loved ones from the shadows of deceit. Subscribe for more stories that dive deep into the complexities of human nature and the devastating effects of betrayal. Stay connected, stay informed, and always trust your instincts. Story 3, August 1999. Lydia, a pastor's wife, faced a night that would change everything. With Lucas away at a church event, the quiet house became a place of temptation Lydia had kept buried deep inside. That night, Lydia crossed a line she never thought she would, and the secret she kept would haunt her for decades. It wasn't just a mistake. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that would unravel her marriage, shake her faith, and change her life forever. But what happened after that night? How did one secret grow so powerful that it would destroy everything they built? The answers lie buried in the years that followed, a story of silence, deception, and a choice that no one could have predicted. Lucas Matthews was born and raised in Lake City, Florida, a place known less for its charm and more for the harsh realities that gripped its streets. The city's reputation wasn't built on hope, but on the sounds that echoed day and night, sirens blaring in the distance, raised voices in heated confrontations, and the occasional sharp crack of gunfire breaking the heavy silence. Families here lived with a constant tension hanging in the air, a silent understanding that danger was never far away. From an early age, Lucas witnessed this harsh world firsthand. He saw neighbors fall victim to street fights, disputes that escalated into bloodshed with frightening speed. The faces of those lost stayed with him. Some were friends, others strangers, but all left marks on his young mind. The community he called home was a place where violence was a language everyone seemed forced to learn, where fear was woven into the fabric of daily life. But amidst this chaos, Lucas carried a different feeling. He felt a deep, growing resistance to the violence surrounding him, a hatred for the pain and destruction it left behind. Yet there was also a profound helplessness. He was just a boy, powerless to stop the fights, unable to shield those he cared about. Each scream in the night, every flash of anger reinforced a determination that grew quietly inside him. He would find another way. This internal conflict shaped him. The streets taught him brutality, but his heart pushed him toward peace. He looked beyond the broken neighborhood and imagined something better, a life where faith could heal wounds instead of inflicting them, where hope could replace fear. This vision pulled him toward the church, a place where he first tasted the idea that his life could have meaning beyond survival. Lucas' resolve was more than a simple desire for change. It was a mission born of pain and longing. He wanted to protect others from the violence he had seen, to save those trapped in cycles he knew all too well. His journey was not just about leaving the past behind, but confronting it, transforming the anger and fear into a force that could inspire and uplift. Yet, beneath the calm exterior of the preacher, Lucas Matthews would become, there remained a weight. The emotional scars of a childhood lived in the shadow of violence. The question lingered quietly. Could faith alone be enough to overcome the darkness he had known? Or was there something else buried in that past, waiting to surface? Vincent Matthews was a man shaped by the same streets that tested his son, but his path was markedly different. After Lucas' mother left them, disappearing without explanation when Lucas was still young, Vincent found himself thrust into the role of both father and mother. Alone, he took on the responsibility of raising his son in a city that demanded toughness and resilience. He worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs just to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. From early mornings to late nights, Vincent's days were long, filled with sacrifices most never saw. In Lake City, Vincent carried a reputation that came with mixed feelings. He wasn't a criminal, but he was no stranger to the city's darker corners. Known to know the right people and to keep company with those who lived on the edge, Vincent walked a fine line between survival and lawfulness. To many, he was the community flirt, a man with charm and charisma who enjoyed the attention of many women, but his true loyalty was always to his son. Despite his reputation, he was deeply devoted to Lucas, fiercely protective, and determined to give him a life better than the one they had. Vincent's love for Lucas was not expressed in easy words or soft gestures. It was shown through his unyielding work ethic and his refusal to allow the boy to be swallowed by the chaos around them. He made sure Lucas went to school, attended church, and stayed away from the violence that so often claimed young men in their neighborhood. Vincent's toughness was his way of shielding Lucas, his own strength a barrier against the world's harshness. Vincent's influence on Lucas extended far beyond their daily routines. He taught his son lessons about strength, survival, and loyalty, but also about morality and choices. Lucas learned that life was rarely black and white, that sometimes good people had to make hard decisions in difficult circumstances. It was this complexity, this mixture of toughness and care, that laid the foundation for Lucas's later faith and his drive to change his own story. Yet Vincent's shadow was long, And the legacy he left behind was not simple. It carried with it the weight of a city's struggles, a family's fractured past, and the silent hopes of a father who wanted better for his son. How much of Vincent's life shaped the man Lucas became? And how did this relationship prepare Lucas for the trials yet to come? As Lucas Matthews reached adulthood, the weight of his past, the harsh streets of Lake City, the challenges of his upbringing, pressed heavily on him. But instead of succumbing to those pressures, he chose a path few in his neighborhood ever took. He decided to leave it all behind. Weston, Florida, a suburban city known for its quiet streets and growing communities, promised a fresh start, a chance to rebuild not just his life but his purpose. Arriving in Weston, Lucas threw himself into the church with a fierce determination. His passion was clear to those who listened to him preach. His words carried the someone who had seen darkness but chose light. With charisma and conviction, he quickly became a respected figure in the local faith community. Not long after, he founded his own ministry, a space where he could shape his vision of hope, healing, and salvation. In this new chapter, Lucas met Lydia Rose. She was a vibrant, determined woman with her own history of pain and struggle. As the choir mistress at his church, Lydia brought music and spirit to the congregation, weaving her voice into the fabric of their worship. Her ambition matched Lucas' zeal, and though her past remained quietly tucked away, her presence was a beacon to those seeking light. Their meeting was more than coincidence. It was a convergence of two souls drawn together by a shared desire to save and be saved. They found in each other a kind of mutual hope, a sense that together they could build something lasting, something pure. Their conversations moved beyond the practical to the spiritual, each recognizing in the other a kindred spirit fighting for redemption. The chemistry between Lucas and Lydia was unmistakable. Their partnership wasn't just about ministry. It was about healing wounds they both carried and dreaming of a future filled with faith and purpose. Their spiritual alignment created a bond that felt both powerful and unshakable, a partnership that promised to change their lives forever. Their relationship remained chaste, grounded in faith and mutual respect, as they prepared for a new chapter. That chapter began on May 9, 1996. On this day, the church was alive with joy and celebration. The pews overflowed with friends, family, and members of the congregation who had watched Lucas and Lydia's journey unfold. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers and the sound of hymns sung in unison. Lucas stood at the altar, calm but resolute, dressed in his best suit, while Lydia, radiant in her wedding gown, moved gracefully down the aisle. Their vows were spoken with conviction, promises to love, to honor, and to uphold their shared faith no matter what lay ahead. The community admired them deeply. They were seen as a perfect match, the pastor whose sermons inspired, and the choir mistress whose voice lifted spirits. Together they embodied hope, unity, and faith, symbols of what was possible when two people dedicated themselves not only to each other but to a higher calling. Many believed their marriage would be the cornerstone of a ministry destined to grow and touch countless lives. Yet beneath the surface of that perfect day, there were quiet struggles beginning to take shape. Lydia carried burdens she kept well hidden, shadows from her past that whispered doubts and fears when no one was looking. These hidden struggles were subtle at first, a hesitation here, a moment of silence there, but they were present, quietly shaping the life they were building. While the congregation saw a united front, the reality was more complicated, laying the groundwork for challenges that would soon test their vows and faith. This day marked not just a union of two lives, but the beginning of a story filled with both light and darkness, one that would stretch far beyond the celebration in that church. It was a moment of hope, but also the start of something much more complex, a path that neither Lucas nor Lydia could have fully imagined. The early years of Lucas and Lydia's marriage were marked by joy and shared purpose. Their partnership and ministry flourished, and they were often seen as a model couple within the church community. Yet, as the months passed and the honeymoon glow faded, cracks began to appear beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect union. By the second year, an unspoken tension started to grow, quietly pulling them apart. Lydia found herself growing restless, her sexual satisfaction in the marriage waning in ways Lucas did not fully understand. The intimacy they once shared became distant, replaced by moments of silence and frustration. Lucas, absorbed in his duties and ministry, was unaware of the growing emptiness Lydia felt. He did not recognize the widening gap nor the desires that she struggled to voice. The private pain Lydia carried remained locked behind smiles and dutiful appearances. In search of understanding and comfort, Lydia turned to her closest friend Mirabelle. Their conversations were deep and honest, revealing Lydia's inner turmoil. She spoke of feeling disconnected, unfulfilled, and trapped in a role that no longer met her needs. Mirabelle listened with a knowing gaze but then offered advice that planted a dangerous seed. If Lucas could not satisfy her, why not seek what she was missing elsewhere? The suggestion was blunt and controversial, challenging the very foundation of Lydia's beliefs and values. The words hung heavily in the air, creating a tension that neither woman could ignore. Lydia wrestled with the idea, torn between loyalty to her marriage and the temptation of relief. She rejected the thought at first, calling it a sin and a betrayal of everything she had vowed to uphold. Yet, despite her denial, the suggestion lingered in her mind. It quietly took root, growing in the shadows of her conscience, feeding a restless hunger that neither faith nor marriage had yet satisfied. This moment marked the beginning of a slow shift in Lydia's heart, a moment where desire and doubt began to intertwine. What started as a fleeting thought would soon lead her down a path she never intended to take, setting in motion events that would change everything. The distance between her and Lucas grew, not just in body but in spirit, as secrets and unspoken needs pushed them further apart. As Lydia faced this internal struggle, the question remained, could the marriage withstand the growing divide? And what choices would she make in the silence of her doubt? The answers were still hidden, waiting to surface in ways no one expected. August 26, 1999 arrived with a sense of quiet disruption. Vincent Matthews, Lucas's father, was set to stay with his son and daughter-in-law for a few weeks, while his apartment underwent renovations. What was meant to be a temporary visit would soon shift the course of their lives in ways none of them could have foreseen. The house in Weston, usually a sanctuary of faith and family, would become the setting for a secret that would haunt them all. For Lydia, Vincent's arrival stirred something she struggled to ignore. The restlessness she had kept hidden from Lucas found a new outlet in the presence of his father. Alone with Vincent in the house, away from the watchful eyes of their community, Lydia's internal conflict grew. The tension between duty and desire twisted inside her. Her longing for satisfaction now focused sharply on the man who was family, yet not bound by the vows she made to Lucas. Vincent was no stranger to the unspoken undercurrents between them. He recognized Lydia's need, and rather than resist, he allowed himself to be drawn in. Their interaction became a careful dance of mutual understanding, a tacit agreement to seize a fleeting moment of pleasure. For Vincent, it was a casual encounter, something given and received without words, a departure from the roles they each played in the family. For Lydia, it was more, a dangerous indulgence that promised release from the frustration she bore silently. That night was cold, the chill of late August pressing against the windows of the house. Lucas was away at a church event, his absence leaving the home unusually quiet and vulnerable. Lydia returned late from work, weary and consumed by thoughts she barely dared to voice. As she entered the house, the cold air inside seemed to echo the emptiness she felt. The encounter took place in their matrimonial bed, the very place where promises had been made and love declared. The contrast between sacred vows and the forbidden act was stark, the betrayal deepened by the setting. Lydia's body and mind were caught between pleasure and guilt, desire and dread. She moaned softly as Vincent met her needs, satisfying cravings that Lucas had failed to fulfill. In those hours, the foundation of her marriage was quietly fractured. By morning, they had returned to their separate rooms, the night's secret buried beneath layers of silence. To the outside world, nothing had changed. Lucas would never suspect the storm that had passed through his home. Yet, what is buried in darkness rarely stays hidden forever. The weight of that night settled deep within Lydia's conscience, a secret that would resurface in time, shaping the tragedy that lay ahead. The act, though hidden, was not forgotten. It lingered like a shadow, coloring the days that followed and planting the seeds of pain and deceit that would unravel the life Lucas and Lydia had built. This was the turning point, the moment where desire overpowered loyalty, setting into motion events that would shatter trust and tear a family apart. On September 7, 1999, Lydia noticed something was wrong. Her period was late, a small detail, but enough to stir a growing unease within her. The quiet doubts that had been gathering in the corners of her mind now took center stage. She felt a nervous tension, the kind that lingers before a life-changing revelation. Seeking answers, Lydia made an appointment with her doctor, hoping for reassurance, but instead she received news that would alter everything. She was pregnant. The reality hit Lydia like a wave. The pregnancy was unexpected, unwelcome, and fraught with complications she wasn't ready to face. Conflicted and scared, she turned once more to Mirabelle, her closest confidant, for guidance. In their conversations, Lydia found a sense of shared experience. Mirabelle spoke openly about her own abortion, describing it as something she had done before without regret. She encouraged Lydia to consider the same path, assuring her it was not the end, but a way to reclaim control. After much contemplation and growing pressure, Lydia decided to follow that advice. The abortion was supposed to be a straightforward procedure, a step toward erasing the evidence of that night with Vincent and returning to the life she knew. But the procedure did not go as planned. Complications arose, and the medical intervention led to consequences far beyond what Lydia could have imagined. On September 25, 1999, the doctor delivered devastating news. Lydia had lost her womb. She would never be able to carry a child again. The weight of that revelation was immense, a loss that was not just physical, but deeply emotional. It was a silent, invisible wound she carried within her, one she knew she could not share with Lucas. The psychological toll was crushing. Lydia's feelings swirled in a complex mix of shame, fear, and desperation. The secret became a heavy burden, one she was determined to keep hidden from her husband and the community they both served. To reveal it would be to unravel the life they had built, a truth she was unwilling to face. She moved through her days cloaked in silence, her pain locked behind carefully controlled expressions. This hidden injury shaped Lydia's world in profound ways. It fed a growing sense of isolation and guilt, setting her on a path where deception felt like the only option. The loss of her womb was not just a medical fact. It was a fracture in her identity, a secret that would cast long shadows over the years to come. 5 years after the abortion, on July 12, 2004, Lydia made a calculated move to protect her secret and redirect the blame. She pressed Lucas to undergo fertility testing, framing it as a shared concern about their ability to have children. Behind closed doors, Lydia had already made arrangements with Dr. Priscilla, the very same physician who had performed her abortion years earlier. This doctor was complicit in the deception, agreeing to falsify the results to suit Lydia's plan. The test results arrived quietly, but carried a devastating blow for Lucas. The doctor informed him that he was infertile. For Lucas, a man whose life was deeply rooted in faith and family, the news shattered more than just his hopes of fatherhood. It sent him spiraling into an emotional and spiritual crisis. Years of dedication to his ministry and unwavering service to God suddenly felt overshadowed by personal failure. He questioned everything, his worth, his purpose, even the justice of the life he had led. The burden of this false diagnosis weighed heavily on Lucas, isolating him in silence. Yet, Lydia maintained the facade of support, gently suggesting that they consider adoption as an alternative path to building their family. To the outside world, they appeared united, facing their challenge together with faith and resolve. But beneath the surface, Lydia's deception deepened, weaving a web of lies that kept Lucas blind to the truth. This period marked a turning point, the moment when trust between them was quietly fractured, hidden behind medical reports and whispered assurances. Lydia's secret was safe, but at a terrible cost. Lucas's heartbreak grew, fueled by a lie that cast long shadows over their marriage and his faith. The foundation they had built was beginning to crumble, even as the world applauded their strength. May 9, 2006 was supposed to mark a joyous occasion, the 10th wedding anniversary of Lucas and Lydia Matthews. The church was prepared for a celebration, friends and family ready to honor a decade of commitment and faith. But fate had a different plan. On that very day, Vincent Matthews, Lucas's father, passed away. His death was sudden and final, striking at the heart of a family already carrying hidden burdens. For Lucas, losing Vincent was like losing his anchor. Vincent had been a figure of strength through the storms of his early life. The man who raised him single-handedly in a tough city, who modeled resilience in the face of adversity. Vincent's guidance had shaped Lucas's values and his commitment to a different way of life. Now, without his father's presence, Lucas felt adrift. The grief was deep, a quiet ache that settled into his bones. It was a loss that echoed through every part of his life, from his ministry to his marriage. Lydia wore the mask of mourning with practiced ease, offering comfort to Lucas in his grief. Her words were soft, her touch gentle, as she stood by his side through the hardest days. To the world, she was the grieving daughter-in-law, sharing in the sorrow of losing a beloved father. But beneath that carefully maintained exterior, Lydia felt a quiet relief. Vincent Matthews had passed away from natural causes, peacefully, without suspicion or pain that would expose what lay beneath. In her heart, Lydia knew that with Vincent gone, one more secret was finally being buried, locked away where no one could find it. The weight of that hidden truth lifted slightly, replaced by a cautious hope that the past might stay buried alongside him. Yet the relief was tempered by the knowledge that other secrets still lingered, waiting to unravel the fragile life she and Lucas had built. Her mourning was real, but so was the small, shadowed part of her that felt the freedom of a secret that would never again haunt their present. Amid this grief, another truth pressed in. The family Lucas and Lydia had dreamed of was still incomplete. The years of trying to conceive had ended without success, a silence that weighed heavily on them both. Lydia's secret, the loss of her womb after the abortion, remained carefully hidden, but its absence was felt in every empty room, in every quiet moment. The dream of biological children was no longer possible, yet the longing for family remained strong. In this space of loss and longing, the couple made a decision. They chose to adopt, hoping to fill the void with love and new life. Sean arrived, a 10-year-old boy full of energy and life, his presence brightening the Matthews household in ways they hadn't anticipated. Sean's laughter echoed through the rooms that had once felt empty. His curiosity and spirit brought a fresh vitality, a chance to rewrite their story. Integrating Sean into their family was both joyful, challenging. They navigated school enrollments, doctor visits, and the everyday realities of parenting a child with his own history and needs. Lucas and Lydia showered him with attention, working hard to create a sense of stability and belonging. They wanted Sean to feel loved and accepted, part of a family bound by faith and hope. To the outside world, the Matthews were a complete family, a pastor, his wife, and their adopted son, united and strong. But behind closed doors, complexities remained. Sean's arrival was both a blessing and a reminder of the secrets Lydia carried. The deception that shielded Lucas from the truth about her infertility also cast shadows over their daily lives. The perfect image they projected was carefully maintained, even as the cracks beneath grew wider. Lucas embraced fatherhood with both love and a quiet sadness, aware of what had been lost, but determined to give Sean the life he deserved. Lydia's feelings were more conflicted. Sean was a source of joy, but also a living reminder of the choices she had made and the lies that held their family together. This period was marked by a fragile balance, a family forged in love but shadowed by hidden pain. The warmth of their new life coexisted with the tension of secrets unspoken, a tension that would soon demand its reckoning. The Matthews had built a family, but the foundation beneath it was uncertain. setting the stage for events that would challenge everything they believed and held dear. Years moved forward, carrying Sean Matthews from boyhood into young adulthood. Throughout those years, the Matthews family maintained the image of a loving, united household, one grounded in faith, hope, and resilience. Sean, once the lively child who had brought light into Lucas and Lydia's lives, grew into a strong, determined young man. His milestones were celebrated with quiet pride, the kind that the complexities simmering just beneath the surface. At 19, Sean Matthews took a decisive step by enlisting in the military, the U.S. Army. This choice symbolized more than just a career move. It was a defining moment in his young life. Leaving behind the safety of home, Sean entered basic training, a rigorous and demanding process designed to test physical strength, mental resilience, and discipline. Days were filled with relentless drills, early mornings, and strict routines that pushed recruits to their limits. For Sean, this period was a transformation, molding him into a soldier and teaching him the values of duty, honor, and perseverance. Basic training was only the beginning. After graduation, Sean moved on to advanced training and specialized schooling, depending on his assigned role. This phase deepened his skills and prepared him for real-world challenges. The military structure offered Sean a new sense of purpose and identity, one that contrasted sharply with the complicated family history he left behind. Letters and phone calls home revealed a young man growing in confidence and maturity, someone learning to navigate the complexities of service life with determination. Sean's deployment took him away from home, placing him in environments that tested both his training and his spirit. The physical demands were intense, long hours, unpredictable conditions, and the constant pressure to remain alert. Emotionally, the separation from family and the realities of service weighed heavily. Yet Sean's commitment never wavered. Reports from his commanders spoke of a soldier who was reliable, focused, and respected by his peers. His time in uniform was marked by moments of camaraderie, sacrifice, and personal growth. Despite the distance and demands, Sean worked to keep strong ties with Lucas and Lydia. Letters home often included reflections on his experiences and reassurances of his well-being. Calls were opportunities to share news and receive encouragement. These connections sustained both Sean and his parents, reinforcing the bond that adoption had created. The family's communications were filled with hope, faith, and the quiet pride of watching Sean build a future far removed from the shadows of their past. Throughout his service, Sean earned commendations for his dedication and professionalism. Whether for physical endurance, leadership in the field, or commitment to teamwork, these accolades painted a picture of a young man excelling in a demanding world. His military record became a point of pride for the Matthews family and their community, a testament to Sean's resilience and strength. Service was not without its challenges. Sean faced moments of doubt, homesickness, and the emotional toll of military life. In quieter moments, he reflected on his origins and the family that had adopted him. The complexities of identity, belonging, and loyalty often surfaced, shaping the man he was becoming. These inner struggles, though seldom spoken aloud, added depth to his journey and foreshadowed the tensions that would later surface in the family's story. During his time in the U.S. Army, Sean remained in close contact with his adoptive parents. Letters were exchanged, phone calls made, and occasional visits arranged whenever duty allowed. These moments were filled with warmth and encouragement, reinforcing the appearance of a close, supportive family. Lucas and Lydia were careful to maintain this facade of unity, knowing that their public image was a shield against the judgments and questions that might arise if their private struggles ever came to light. One standout event was his participation in the Army Games, a series of intense competitions designed to test the physical strength, endurance, and skill of soldiers across various units. Competing against some of the best, Sean's determination and discipline shone through. His performance earned him an award, a symbol of his hard work and resilience. This recognition was more than a medal. It was a powerful affirmation of Sean's ability to rise above challenges and excel under pressure. For the Matthews family, the award was a source of immense pride, a public acknowledgement of the young man's dedication and talent. It became a beacon of hope, reinforcing the narrative that Sean was building a life far removed from the struggles and secrets of his past. On May 9, 2024, Sean marked his parents' 25th wedding anniversary with a gift meant to symbolize new beginnings, a beautiful house in their hometown. Though stationed far from home and unable to present it to them in person, Sean arranged for the keys to the new house and a celebratory cake to be delivered directly to Lucas and Lydia. The gesture was filled with hope and excitement, a promise of fresh chapters and a place to create new memories. Lucas and Lydia were thrilled beyond words. The idea of moving into a spacious modern home sparked dreams of peace and renewal. For years, they had longed to leave behind the weight of their past, and this house seemed like the perfect place to start again. The delivery of the keys was a moment of celebration, accompanied by sweet cake and heartfelt messages from Sean, reminders that family, no matter the distance or history, could offer hope. That day, Lydia and Lucas went to inspect the house. When they first stepped into their new home, a wave of emotions washed over them. The spacious rooms, fresh paint, and gleaming floors filled them with a sense of hope and possibility. Lydia's eyes sparkled as she moved from room to room, imagining how they would fill the space with laughter, family gatherings, and quiet moments of peace. For Lucas, there was a quiet satisfaction, a feeling that after so many years of struggle, they had finally earned a place that felt like a true sanctuary. But beneath the surface, a subtle tension lingered. Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that the emptiness of the large house echoed the void in their lives. The children they never had, the secrets they kept. Lucas, though outwardly calm, sensed the heaviness too, a weight that the walls seemed to absorb and reflect back at them. Their smiles held a fragile hope, but in quiet moments, doubt and unease crept in, foreshadowing the challenges that this new beginning would soon bring. Sean had also arranged for the movers to come on June 17, 2024. From thousands of miles away stationed overseas, he coordinated every detail to ensure the day would go smoothly for his parents. Boxes, furniture, and personal belongings began to fill the rooms of their new house, turning an empty space into a home. There was excitement in the air, a fresh start after years of carrying burdens too heavy to bear. Lydia took charge of coordinating the packing efforts in the kitchen, a central hub of activity and quiet command. Amid the hustle of movers carrying boxes and furniture through the house, she stood with a clipboard in hand, methodically checking off items and directing the placement of belongings. Her eyes moved swiftly between the stacks of carefully wrapped dishes, pots, and pantry goods, ensuring nothing was left behind or damaged. She communicated calmly, yet firmly, with the movers, explaining which boxes held fragile items and which rooms they belonged to in the new house. At times, she paused to make last-minute decisions, what to pack tighter, what to unpack first, and which sentimental items needed extra care. Lydia's focus was intense, masking the storm of emotions beneath her composed exterior. Between tasks, she took brief moments to sip water or adjust her phone, where texts from Sean occasionally popped up, words of encouragement and reminders about schedules. Despite the chaos around her, Lydia maintained an appearance of control and grace, projecting hope and optimism for the fresh start ahead. Yet, for all her coordination and planning, the kitchen, the heart of the home, felt strangely empty, as if the very space that once nurtured life now echoed the secrets she carried deep inside. Lucas was deeply involved in coordinating the moving efforts throughout the house, his focus sharp as he moved from room to ensure everything was accounted for. He started in the sitting room, a space filled with memories. The worn sofa where family gatherings had taken place, the mantel adorned with framed photos of happier times. He carefully directed the movers on how to handle the larger pieces of furniture, stressing the importance of protecting fragile items like the glass coffee table and delicate vases. Each instruction came with a sense of urgency, as if Lucas wanted to preserve more than just possessions. He wanted to hold on to the fragments of a life that was about to change. From the sitting room, Lucas moved to their bedroom. The room held a different kind of weight, private, intimate moments shared over the years, dreams whispered in the dark. He watched as movers wrapped the bed frame carefully, and he helped fold clothing, making sure nothing was damaged or misplaced. The closet, once a simple storage space, now felt like a vault of their shared history. Each item he touched seemed to carry silent stories. From worn shirts to the wedding ring kept in a small box, there was a heaviness in the air, the kind that makes every action deliberate, every movement laden with unspoken emotion. After overseeing the main living areas, Lucas turned his attention to the basement. The space was dim and cluttered, filled with boxes and items that had been tucked away over the years. Old photo albums, holiday decorations, forgotten keepsakes. He began systematically scanning the corners and shelves, determined not to leave anything behind. His flashlight beam caught dust motes dancing in the still air as he bent down to examine a stack of storage bins. It was then that his eyes landed on something unusual, an envelope, worn and covered in dust, tucked behind a loose wooden panel near the back wall. It wasn't where it should have been, it was clearly hidden, yet within reach. A quiet sense of curiosity overcame him as he pulled the envelope free, feeling the weight of the unknown in his hands. As he opened it slowly, the contents revealed themselves. Papers, a diary, and medical documents that had been concealed for years. He opened the diary with trembling hands, the worn pages fragile beneath his fingertips. Slowly, he began to read, each word pulling him deeper into a story he had never been told. The entries were raw and honest, revealing Lydia's private thoughts and fears, the loneliness she felt, the weight of secrets she carried, and the night that changed everything between them. As he turned each page, the pieces came together: the secret encounter with Vincent, her father-in-law, the pregnancy she never revealed, the desperate decision to have an abortion, and the devastating loss of her womb. Further inside, he found medical records confirming the abortion's complications, and a disturbing note about falsified fertility tests, orchestrated to make him believe he was the one unable to have children. With every revelation, Lucas felt his world crumble. The betrayal was deeper than he could have imagined, not just the hidden acts, but the years of lies carefully constructed to deceive him. His heart ached with confusion, pain, and disbelief. The woman he loved, the man he trusted, and the family he believed in, all shattered in those pages. He closed the diary slowly, tears blurring his vision. The truth was undeniable, yet unbearable. In that quiet basement, surrounded by the remnants of their life, Lucas felt everything he had known unravel, leaving him alone with a broken heart and questions that might never be answered. Despite the overwhelming flood of emotions, Lucas chose to remain silent. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on his chest, but he kept the truth locked away, burying his anguish deep inside. He retreated into himself, nursing his pain in quiet solitude, careful to maintain the calm and faith that others expected of him. In public, he wore a composed facade, going through the motions of daily life, attending church and fulfilling his duties as a pastor. But behind closed doors, the silence was deafening. The secrets he had uncovered consumed his thoughts, and each day became a struggle to reconcile the man he believed himself to be with the painful reality he now faced. Lucas's silence was a shield, a way to protect what remained of his world, while he grappled with the betrayal that threatened to unravel everything. It was a lonely path, one marked by unanswered questions and a heart quietly breaking beneath the weight of a truth too heavy to share. After days and nights filled with silent turmoil, Lucas made a decision that would change everything once again. Alone, away from prying eyes and the expectations of his congregation, he scheduled an independent fertility test. This was a step he took not just to find answers, but to reclaim a piece of himself that had been stolen through years of deception. The clinic was clinical and unfeeling, starkly different from the warmth of his home or the pulpit where he preached hope. Lucas sat quietly through the procedure, his mind racing with questions and fears. He was prepared for disappointment, bracing for confirmation of the infertility he had been told to believe. But when the results came back, they told a very different story. Lucas was potent. The tests confirmed that he was fully capable of fathering children. The revelation was like a punch to the gut, an undeniable fact that shattered the carefully constructed lie he had been living under for years. The deception that had been placed on his shoulders, the blame that had weighed heavily on his heart, was now exposed as false. The emotional storm that followed was intense. Rage burned beneath his calm exterior, a fury not just at the betrayal itself, but at the years of trust and faith that had been manipulated. Feelings of hurt and confusion tangled together, challenging the very worldview Lucas had held close his entire life. How could someone so close, someone he loved, orchestrate such a profound betrayal? How had his faith and identity been twisted by lies? Lydia's manipulation was laid bare before him, a carefully planned act of deceit involving false medical reports, secret decisions, and years of silence. The truth stripped away the illusion of their marriage and the image they had projected to the world. Lucas was left to confront not only the betrayal of his wife, but the deep wound to his own sense of self. In that moment, Lucas's world fractured. The man who had dedicated his life to serving others now faced a personal crisis that tested every belief and value he had ever held. The test was more than medical. It was a reckoning, a moment where the truth shattered the foundation of his life and forced him to question everything. June 30th, 2024 unfolded quietly in the Matthews' new home. But beneath the calm exterior, tension simmered like a hidden fault line waiting to break. The house, still filled with unpacked boxes and the scent of fresh paint, held an uneasy atmosphere. Lydia moved through the rooms with a practiced grace, but her words that evening carried a sharper edge than usual. Sitting across from Lucas at the dinner table, she spoke softly but deliberately, lamenting the empty rooms that echoed through their home and the absence of children to fill those spaces. Her voice was tinged with sadness, but the message was clear, a subtle, cutting reminder of everything Lucas now knew but had not confronted her about. His thoughts sharpened into cold clarity. This was not a moment for words or tears, but for action, a decision that had been forming quietly in the shadows of his heart. Lucas moved deliberately, his every step measured, as he prepared to make a choice that would change everything. That evening, Lucas entered the kitchen with quiet purpose. He moved with calm precision, gathering the ingredients for a milkshake. The way Lydia had always liked it, sweet and smooth with just the right amount of creaminess. The blender whirred softly as he mixed the drink, every motion deliberate, every detail accounted for. When the milkshakes were ready, he carried one to Lydia and handed it to her with a subtle smile that barely touched his eyes. Beneath that gentle expression lay a hidden resolve, a secret he held close. Lydia took the glass without suspicion, her lips curling into a smile as she reached for the drink. The moment was ordinary, almost tender, but the milkshake had already been spiked, a calculated step in a plan that was about to unfold. As Lydia drank, unaware of the truth behind the sweetness, Lucas watched quietly, the weight of what was to come heavy on his mind. The house was filled with the soft sounds of night settling in, but beneath the calm surface, the final act was already beginning. After taking the first few sips, the familiar taste comforting her, Lucas watched closely, his gaze steady and unreadable. Slowly, her eyelids began to droop, her movements growing heavy and sluggish. The warmth of the milkshake and what it carried started to take effect. Her breathing softened, her body relaxed, and before long, Lydia was dozing off, slipping into a deep, unresponsive sleep. Lucas remained silent, observing the calm that had overtaken her, knowing that the moment he had prepared for was finally here. The quiet of the house seemed to deepen, holding its breath as the night's darkest chapter quietly began. Now, the moment Lucas had steeled himself for had arrived. With careful hands, he lifted Lydia from her chair and carried her to the basement, a place that had long held silent secrets and hidden pain. The air was cooler here, heavier with the weight of what was about to unfold. He reached for the electric hacksaw he had purchased after the fertility test confirmed the truth he had been denied for so many years. This tool, cold and mechanical, symbolized the finality of his decision. As he prepared, a strange clarity settled over him, a grim resolve born from years of betrayal and heartbreak. He did the unthinkable. He dismembered his wife in their basement. To him, this was the deserving punishment for what she did. He started with the legs, he cut them off, the same legs she had opened for Vincent, same legs she had used to climb the altar. Then he went to her hands. Lydia screamed throughout, but it did not change anything. He took off her head as the last act. The violence stood in stark contrast to the man he once was, a man who had sought peace but was now consumed by a chilling sense of justice. To Lucas, this was not simply an act of rage, but a final reckoning. The basement was now filled with forgotten memories. The stillness of the night was shattered by frantic cries echoing from the home. Neighbors, startled awake by agonizing screams and sounds of distress, immediately dialed 911. Within minutes, police vehicles swarmed the quiet Weston neighborhood, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the suburban streets. Officers arrived prepared for a routine call, but were soon confronted with a scene far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The discovery in the basement sent shockwaves through the local community and beyond. Lucas Matthews, the once respected pastor, was quickly taken into custody. Faced with overwhelming evidence and burdened by his own confession, he did not resist arrest. His words, calm yet haunted, revealed the depth of his torment and the reasons that drove him to commit the unthinkable. The community struggled to reconcile the image of a man devoted to faith with the reality of the crime he confessed to. His arrest became a focal point of local news, stirring a mixture of disbelief, sorrow, and fear. August 10th, 2024 marked the beginning of a trial that gripped the community and captured the nation's attention. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation as media crews set up cameras and reporters prepared to cover every detail. Friends, family, and curious onlookers filled the seats, eager to witness the proceedings of a case that blurred the lines between faith, betrayal, and justice. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Lucas Matthews appeared solemn, his once commanding presence diminished by the weight of his actions and the coming scrutiny. The prosecution laid out the story in painstaking detail, from the hidden secrets buried for years to the discovery that shattered lives, and finally, the brutal act that ended a marriage and a life. Witnesses were called, including neighbors who had heard the fateful screams, experts who testified on the medical deceptions, and investigators who pieced together the timeline. The defense sought to explain Lucas's state of mind, portraying a man shattered by years of manipulation and deception. Arguments unfolded about the psychological toll of betrayal, the erosion of trust, and the ultimate breaking point. Emotions ran high as Lydia's hidden struggles were revealed, drawing sympathy even amid shock. As the trial unfolded, the role of Dr. Priscilla came sharply into focus, casting a new light on the tangled web of deceit. Prosecutors revealed that she had not only performed Lydia's abortion, but had actively participated in the cover-up that followed. It was Dr. Priscilla who falsified Lucas's fertility test results, intentionally misleading him into believing he was infertile. This deception shifted the blame away from Lydia, ensuring the secret remained buried. Witnesses testified about communications between Lydia and Dr. Priscilla, illustrating a calculated plan to protect Lydia at Lucas's expense. Medical records presented in court showed inconsistencies and alterations, painting a picture of professional misconduct entwined with personal betrayal. The courtroom was struck by the gravity of this revelation. Dr. Priscilla's actions were not simply medical errors, but deliberate manipulations that contributed directly to the unraveling of a family. Her defense argued her intentions were to protect a patient in distress, but the jury saw the damage caused by her involvement. Judge Marshall Thompson finally took the bench, his presence commanding the courtroom into silence. The weight of the moment was unmistakable as he prepared to deliver the verdict in a case that had gripped the community and stirred national debate. His voice was steady and deliberate as he began. After careful consideration of all evidence, testimonies, and arguments presented, the court finds Lucas Matthews guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence is life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge's words echoed through the packed room, final and resolute. Turning to Dr. Priscilla, Judge Thompson continued, regarding your actions in falsifying medical records and enabling deception, this court sentences you to 5 years of incarceration for professional misconduct and deceit. The verdict brought a mixture of reactions, relief for some, sorrow for others. The judge concluded with a solemn reminder of the case's complexity. This is a tragedy born of betrayal and pain. May it serve as a reminder of the profound consequences that hidden truths and broken trust can bring. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the gavel struck, sealing the fate of Lucas Matthews and Dr. Priscilla. Eyes fixed on them, the community watched in stunned disbelief as they were each handcuffed and led away by officers. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Expressions of shock, sorrow, and a sense of betrayal lingered in the air. For many, it was hard to reconcile the respected preacher and the trusted doctor with the roles they had played in this tragic story. Outside the courthouse, news crews captured the somber procession, broadcasting it live to a nation grappling with the complex layers of the case. Faces of friends, neighbors, and parishioners reflected a mixture of heartbreak and confusion as they tried to process the loss of innocence and the shattering of trust within their community. The sight of Lucas and Priscilla being taken into custody was a stark reminder. The consequences of hidden truths and deceit had finally come to light, leaving wounds that would take years to heal. As the story of Lucas and Lydia Matthews draws to a close, we are left to reflect on a tragic web woven from deception, faith, betrayal, and violence. It is a narrative that challenges our understanding of loyalty and trust, revealing how secrets, no matter how deeply buried, can corrode even the strongest bonds. Could this tragedy have been prevented? It's a question that lingers long after the final verdict. At what point do silence and concealment become as damaging as the betrayals themselves? The cost of lies within a marriage and family is often invisible until it's too late, leaving scars that run far deeper than the surface wounds. Justice has been served, yet it comes at a terrible price: a life lost, a family shattered, and a community forever changed. This case is a sobering reminder that truth and honesty are the fragile threads holding relationships together, and when those threads break, the consequences can be devastating. We invite you to consider the delicate balance of trust and the complex emotions that drive human decisions. Betrayal, forgiveness, love, and pain intertwine in ways that defy simple answers. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.